The room went silent. A little boy tugged on his nanny's dress, looked up with innocent eyes, and called her Mommy in front of everyone. Laughter stopped. Glasses froze midair. And just when the whispers began, a stranger walked in and revealed a truth no one was ready to hear. The Anderson family's grand mansion sparkled that evening, filled with music, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Wealthy guests in polished suits and glittering dresses mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, discussing business, fashion, and gossip. In the middle of it all, little Daniel stood quietly, holding tightly onto the hand of his nanny, Grace. She was a tall, graceful black woman, her presence calm and steady, a sharp contrast to the restless energy of the room. Grace had raised Daniel since he was a baby, and though she usually kept to the background, Daniel never let her drift too far away. As the guests gathered near the dining area, Daniel tugged at her dress, his small voice breaking through the noise. "Mommy, can I have some juice?" The room seemed to freeze. The pianist's fingers hesitated over the keys, the laughter stopped midair, and dozens of eyes turned toward the little boy and his nanny. A few gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by hushed whispers. Mrs. Anderson, dressed elegantly in a shimmering gown, turned sharply, her face stiffening into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, no one moved, as if the air itself had grown heavy. Grace's heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured Daniel a glass of juice, trying to mask her shock, but her silence spoke louder than words. Guests leaned toward each other, whispering in disbelief, their stares piercing Grace like knives. Daniel, innocent and unaware of the storm he had caused, clung even tighter to her arm, smiling with the kind of love only a child could give. In that single word, Mommy, the walls of the Andersons' perfect world began to crack. Mrs. Anderson's cheeks flushed a deep red as the word Mommy echoed in her ears, replaying again and again like a cruel reminder in front of her guests. She forced out a strained laugh, but it sounded brittle and awkward, making the silence in the room feel even heavier. "Daniel, darling," she said with a sweetness laced in steel, "that is not your mommy. She's just your nanny." Her eyes flickered quickly around the room, noting the judgmental stares, the subtle smirks, and the whispered comments. Pride was everything to her, and this slip from her son felt like a humiliation too sharp to ignore. She reached for Daniel's arm, trying to pull him away from Grace, but the boy pressed himself closer to her instead, clinging to her dress as though his life depended on it. Grace lowered her gaze, her voice soft and careful. "He doesn't mean anything by it, ma'am," she whispered, hoping to calm the storm that was rising. But Mrs. Anderson's glare was unforgiving, sharp enough to cut. Guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to sip their drinks while straining to catch every word. Daniel, confused by his mother's anger, frowned and asked, "But why can't I call her Mommy? She loves me." His innocent words fell like stones in the stillness of the room. Mrs. Anderson's throat tightened, her pride battling against the truth her son was too young to hide. She bent down, her voice low but trembling with fury. "Don't you ever say that again," she hissed, her hand gripping his shoulder too tightly. Grace's heart ached at the sight, but she remained silent, torn between her duty and her love. And though Mrs. Anderson managed to straighten up and plaster on another false smile, the fire in her eyes told everyone present that this moment would not be easily forgotten. The tension in the room thickened, wrapping itself around every guest like an invisible rope, until the only sound was Daniel's trembling little voice. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at his mother, then back at Grace, his small hands clutching her dress with all the strength his tiny fingers could hold. "But she is my mommy," he cried, his words sharp in their innocence, cutting deeper than any insult could. "She takes care of me when I'm sick. She tells me stories before I sleep. She tucks me in at night. She kisses me good night and tells me she loves me." A gasp rippled across the room, several guests exchanging stunned glances, some whispering to their partners, as if this child's confession had exposed something far greater than a child's mistake. Grace felt her heart shatter at his words, torn between pride and fear. She wanted to hold him, to shield him, but she dared not meet Mrs. Anderson's burning eyes. Mrs. Anderson's smile faltered, her mask slipping as she tried to hush her son, but Daniel's voice grew louder, filled with desperate truth. "She's my mommy, too," he repeated, tears now spilling freely down his cheeks, his little body trembling with each sob. Grace bent slightly, whispering, "Should Daniel, it's all right," though her own voice shook with unspoken pain. Yet her attempt to calm him only deepened the silence in the room, for everyone could see the truth in the boy's words, truth that could not be erased or silenced by a mother's pride. Mrs. Anderson's hand tightened into a fist, her face pale, her pride wounded in front of every watching eye. But Daniel's words, pure and unfiltered, had already cracked something deeper than reputation. They had cracked the very foundation of the lie holding this family together. Just when the silence had grown unbearable, the sound of the front door creaking open startled the room. Every head turned as a tall man in a long dark coat stepped inside, his presence commanding attention without a single word. He was not dressed like the other wealthy guests. His clothes were simple, his face rugged, but his eyes, deep and unwavering, held a weight that silenced even the whispers. Mrs. Anderson stiffened, her voice sharp as she demanded, "Who are you, and what business do you have here?" The man did not flinch. His gaze shifted from her to Daniel, then lingered on Grace, who stood frozen, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "I'm sorry for intruding," he began, his voice deep and steady, carrying a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "But there is something here tonight that cannot remain hidden any longer." Murmurs broke out among the guests, curiosity flaring as they leaned closer, eager to see the drama unfold. Mrs. Anderson bristled with anger, her pride insulted by the interruption, but she could not deny the fear rising in her chest as the man took slow, deliberate steps forward. Grace's lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words escaped. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and the way she looked at him made it clear this was no stranger to her. Daniel, still clinging to her dress, peered up curiously at the man, sensing something important was about to be revealed. The tension grew unbearable, the air heavy with expectation. Then, after a pause that seemed to last forever, the man finally spoke again, his voice trembling with the weight of the truth he was about to release. "It's time you all knew who Grace really is." The courtroom, once a place of silence and intimidation, now pulsed with a fire that no gavel could put out. Amara's words lingered in the air like thunder, shaking the walls of power that had long protected men like Richard Hale. The jury members exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions hardening as they realized the weight of what they had just heard. One by one, survivors from the gallery began to rise, women who had carried their own scars, some with trembling hands, others with voices cracking as they whispered that Amara's story was also theirs. The truth spread like a rising tide, too powerful to be drowned by prejudice. Richard Hale sat pale and cornered, his arrogance stripped away, his once proud name now poisoned with the truth. Even Judge Harrison, who had entered the trial so certain of control, could not mask his unease as the evidence and testimonies mounted like a storm crashing through his court. When the verdict finally came, the words rang out like freedom itself, guilty on all counts. A gasp of relief swept the room, followed by the sound of hands clapping, voices cheering, hearts beating with hope. Amara closed her eyes as tears streamed down her cheeks, not from weakness, but from release, as though the weight of years had finally been lifted from her soul. She had faced a system designed to break her, and yet she had stood unbroken. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the cameras flashed and the crowd erupted into chants of her name, not just as a billionaire, but as a symbol of courage. In that moment, Amara Daniels knew her fight had become bigger than her story. She had awakened justice, and nothing could silence it again.